let people come in for a couple of minutes, and just to let you all know that this session is being recorded. And so while we wait for other guests to join us, if any of you would like to share, just say hello to us, let us know where you're joining us from this evening. We appreciate your taking time out of your Tuesday evening to join us. And in about a minute or two, we'll begin. Just give it another minute. Thank you all so much for your patience and arriving promptly. We have a great group with us this evening, and we're looking forward to hearing some of your questions and comments. So I might repeat this before Sarah Margolis-Pineo begins, but just wanted to encourage you all, if as the talk is happening, please feel welcome to add questions to the Q&A throughout the talk. We don't need to wait until the end. We will reserve about 15 to 10 minutes at the end for questions and a little bit of time for discussion. So essentially questions won't take place during the talk, but we welcome them to come in. So I think I'll kind of do a gradual intro, knowing that we might have a few other people join us, but it's a couple of minutes after 7. I want to just thank you all again for joining us. And my name is Shayna Dumont-Gar, and I'm the curator of Fruitlands Museum based in Harvard, Massachusetts, which is on the ancient homeland and traditional territory of the Nipmuc Nation, closely related to nearby Pawtucket, Massachusetts, and Wampanoag tribal nations. And we acknowledge the history of the uninvited settlers and violence that followed. And we are working to cultivate respect for enduring relationships that continue to exist between these peoples, their nations, and the land. And as uninvited settlers, we acknowledge this past wrongdoings, including Native erasure and genocide. And again, we're learning better ways to communicate and celebrate Indigenous continuance from now onward. So although we focus on Shaker history, Fruitlands Museum also has a significant collection of Native American art and cultural objects. And it was founded in 1914 by Clara Endicott Sears. I thought I'd just say a little bit about it for those of you who might have a pre-existing interest in either the artwork of Maria Maltini and Allison Halter, or of Shaker history and spirituality, just to share a little bit more about the context of this museum hosting both this talk and the exhibition that prompted it. So in 1914, Clara Endicott Sears, who is from Massachusetts, she founded Fruitlands first because of the Transcendentalists. And there's a farmhouse where a utopian commune, quite short-lived, took place. And then soon after, she did befriend local Harvard and Shirley Shakers. And they agreed and were very happy to help support the foundation of the world's first Shaker Museum. Gradually, she created 4 collections, and that also does include the Indigenous art and culture, as I mentioned, as well as 19th century folk portraits and landscape paintings. And so part of my work over the past 5 years has been focusing on sharing all of these collections through the lens of contemporary art and bringing artists whose work already in some way either reflects or very carefully considers one of these traditions and time-honored ways of making. And so Maria Molteni began studying the spaces and collection at Fruitlands in 2017. So there's been quite a few years of careful thought and study of this place. And their project culminated in the film Sacred Sheets in collaboration with the artist Allison Halter and the cinematographer Gabe Elder. And the film Sacred Sheets is on view in the exhibition Unseen Hours, Space Clearing for Spirit Work, which is on view through March 13th at Fruitlands Museum. It incorporates Shaker objects, including chairs, beekeeping equipment, stereographs, and other objects from Fruitlands Shaker collection. And also, Maria and Allison will be sharing both a screening of the film and a talk on March 2nd. And one of my colleagues will come and repeat that at the end, but you can also check our website and social media for more information. So what we're sharing and what prompts this talk is a long-term study and expression of beliefs that are personal, historical, and spiritual. And those can often be difficult to translate. And there can be lots of different opinions, both over time and just different ways of translating things. So such rich material. So part of what we did was create a document of what happened through this catalog. And I'm sorry about my dogs, but this catalog is almost 100 pages long, and it has amazing, beautiful images, but it also has 2 guest essays by 2 scholars. One of them is Grace Credell, a mystic practitioner who wrote about 19th century context of feminism, literature, and labor history. And finally, I am introducing the other essayist, Sarah Margolis-Pineo, who we are really fortunate to have with us. Thank you so much for joining us. She's an independent curator and writer specializing in American design and craft. And she is currently being an associate for JKR Antiques in South Salem, New York. And thank you for helping to spread the word. We're happy to have all of you here who heard about it through this important channel. So this evening, she'll speak about female visionaries, spirit encounters, and the gift drawings made by Shakers in the mid-19th century that so inspired the project that I just described that's at the center of Maria and Allison's artwork. So I just want to again remind you that you're welcome to bring in questions. This is quite a dense and scholarly topic. We acknowledge many of you might have studied this as well, and we definitely welcome your curiosity and any other things you'd wish to share among each other. But without any further ado, I want to warmly welcome Sarah. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thanks, Shayna, and thank you to Catherine for the invitation. And of course, thanks to you all for joining. I was just looking at the list of everyone who's here, and it's very intimidating, the Shaker scholars that are joining us this evening. So I will do my best not to embarrass myself and the field in the process. Two, I really need to thank Maria and Allison for their brilliance. The video installation Sacred Sheets at Fruitlands on view through March 13th is absolutely brilliant. I mean, as a curator, the projects that are most memorable and that I've loved the most are those that engage history and sort of allow us to see the present and speculate on the future through new, unexpected ways via the past. And it's been really wonderful to be alongside Maria, sort of on their part of this very small part of their Shaker journey so far. And so I hope to lend a bit of historic context tonight, but please just go see the video in person. It's absolutely fantastic. So let me just share my screen. Okay. So before I begin, I just I need to address one issue about the Arab manifestations. It's an unbelievably enthralling interlude in Shaker history. There's spirit visitations, ghosts speaking through mediums, elaborate midnight rituals. It's got everything Hollywood would possibly ever want. That said, I always like to begin any talk about this period in Shaker history by echoing the sentiments of Brother Arnold Hod, one of the 3 practicing Shakers up in the Shaker community in Sabbath Day Lake, Maine. And of those of you who are new to the Shakers, yes, there are living Shakers still practicing in Maine. And you can see their work at mainshakers.com. Brother Arnold reminds us that the era of manifestations was a short-lived period in the ongoing history of the Shakers, a history that dates back to 1747. This means Shaker history spans 275 years and counting, and the era of manifestations is a mere decade within that. So please keep in mind that the Shaker belief in spiritual practices continue to evolve like all religions. And so with that due diligence out of the way, we can get into the guts of the Arab manifestations. It all started on August 16th, 1837, when a group of young girls of the Second and South families of the Waterville, New York Shaker community experienced visionary messages from the spirit world. Brother Isaac Newton Youngs, the scribe of the New Lebanon community, documented that, quote, "The windows of heaven and the avenues of the spirit world were set open and innumerable gifts were showered down, visions, revelations, inspiration, messages from spirits, spiritual presence, and new songs in profusion. The girls' frenzied bodily contortions, powerful shakings and quakings were accompanied by supernatural prophecies, trances, revelations, visions, songs, and dances. The word of these celestial gifts traveled swiftly, and more mediums from other Shaker settlements, who the Shakers called visionists or instruments, relayed a barrage of communications from various deities watching over the Shaker world. In addition to communicating with angels, the Shakers spoke to spirit converts, indigenous Native American spirits, other primitive peoples, deceased family members, and noted historical figures, all of whom converted to Shakerism after death in the spirit world. George Washington, General Lafayette, William Penn, Pope Clement VIII, and the kings and queens of Europe, among others, relayed stories of their quote unquote sufferings in the afterlife until they heeded the Shaker message and found salvation. Shaker founding era luminaries visited as well, including Mother Lucy, Father William, Father Joseph, and of course, Anne Lee herself, to reassert the theological foundations of the faith. Proselytizing, shaking, bowing, and singing in unknown tongues became the norm at Shaker meetings. And this outpouring of visions led to the creation of thousands of Shaker songs, new dances, rituals, and visual art in the form of the Shaker gift drawings. Eventually termed the era of manifestations or mother's work, this period of intense spiritual fervor, which in many ways echoed the origins of the faith in the time of Mother Anne Lee, continued well into the next decade, until about 1845 to 1850 or so, when the broader American spiritualist movement was just getting started. And I apologize to those of you already in the Shaker world, but I'm just going to give a brief background, the obligatory background on the Shakers. The United Society of Believers in Christ's Second Appearing, more commonly known as the Shakers, traced their roots to Manchester, England in 1747, when ex-Quakers James and Jane Wardley founded the Wardley Society. In 1758, Anne Lee, an illiterate woman working in a Manchester factory, found spiritual refuge with the Wardleys. She proved to be a passionate visionary, a conduit of God who shook, trembled, danced, sang, and spoke in unknown tongues under his power. Soon, Lee's intense spiritual revelations regarding the fall of Adam and Eve and her own role as the second coming of Christ anointed her Mother Anne, leader of the Shakers. In 1774, she was able to mobilize a small group of 8 followers to immigrate to the United States in pursuit of religious freedom. And interestingly, the Wardleys were not among them. After landing in New York City, the Shakers settled outside of Albany in 1776 at a place called Niskayuna, later Waterville, and quietly began to set down roots, working to make money so that they could establish themselves as a separate community and freely worship. The Shakers came to America at a time when people were casting about for something new to believe in. Shifting economic, social, and intellectual power structures created unbearable tensions in the lives of these quote unquote ordinary folk. In order to alleviate these anxieties, they demanded comfort from spiritual sources, curiously, not from the empirical evidence fueled by the Enlightenment, but rather from immediate experiences with God. The spiritual revivals of the Great Awakening flourished, and the time was right for Anne Lee's evangelical message of salvation. Two, the political climate of the American Revolution worked in Anne Lee's favor. Although the Shakers were noted and sometimes prosecuted pacifists, the revolution embraced the spirit of a new beginning for the world, a secular second coming that was enthusiastic and religious in spirit, which echoed the Shakers' millennialist beliefs. Like Lee's desire to start a new, sinless, more holy society from scratch, revolutionaries sought a radical new national reality in which individual rights and freedoms and the pursuit of happiness would be the new norm. As a result, Mother Anne was able to draw a number of converts from Protestant and Baptist congregations through her travels through New England. In the 18th century, Anne Lee's primary objective was to assemble a spiritual community. Her ministry did not outline dogmatic theology that translated into a set of earthly practices, but she did establish certain themes that would form the basis of Shakerism today: celibacy, dual Godhead, obedience, confession of sin, manifestation of spirit, perfection, etc., etc. The prime architect of Shakerism, as it is known in practice today, is the first American-born leader of the sect, Father Joseph Meacham. He was appointed father following the death of James Whitaker in 1787, who assumed leadership of the sect after the death of Anne Lee in 1784. According to Shaker biographer Calvin Green, Meacham was approximately 6 feet tall, slim, with broad shoulders, bluish gray eyes, dark brown hair, and a rather dark complexion. He was long-limbed and graceful and presented an overall appearance that inspired confidence and struck beholders with reverential awe. Meacham was also gentle, affable, reserved, inflexible in his duty, and endowed with a wisdom that was remarkable. According to Green, he was a very powerful and discerning speaker whose voice when he spoke, quote, sounded like peals of thunder, and his eyes appeared like the flames of fire, so that it seemed that they would penetrate the inmost recesses of the heart. I just love that description. Mother Anne referred to Meacham as the wisest man to be born in hundreds of years, and lending truth to her pronouncement, he implemented measures that helped the Shakers to create the longest standing utopian experiment in American history. Masterfully, Father Joseph was able to organize Anne Lee's charismatic spiritual revelations into a coherent theological framework that lent a sense of stability as new generations of Shakers were brought into the fold. He recognized that theology in its practical application should pervade all aspects of everyday life as a way of mirroring and embodied spirituality. To this end, he developed a society in which every aspect, the material landscape, routine, daily functioning, social life, was bound up in theological practice. Notably, Father Joseph instituted hierarchies of governance, both spiritual and temporal, that allowed the entire Shaker diaspora to thrive together in union. He appointed Mother Lucy Wright, his female counterpart, thereby establishing gender equality within Shaker governance. He designed the landscape of the Shaker village to be a model of utility, simplicity, and harmony, a visual embodiment of the community's social and spiritual removal from the world. And ultimately, Meacham mobilized disparate groupings of believers into organized communities that, by the time he died in 1796, included 11 societies across 5 states. Father Joseph's lasting importance to the Shakers cannot be understated, and this does come into play with the skip drawings later. Meacham was an important link between the original English cohort and the American converts, and he codified a grand plan for Shaker life, belief, and leadership that's still in practice today. And I do want to get a little bit into Harvard because it's just such a really fascinating history as well. So Harvard was one of the communities officially gathered by Meacham in 1791, as was Shirley in 1793. The origins of the Shaker presence in the region dates to Mother Anne's time in May of 1781, when Shaker missionaries journeyed eastward, traveling from town to town and living with converts for a period of time to initiate them into the faith. Arriving in Harvard, the Shaker moved into Shardock, Ireland's Square House. Apologies if I mispronounced that, a site that had significance for Mother Anne, who claimed she had been shown the Square House and the Irelandites in a vision when she was still in England. Ireland was a pipe fitter from Charlestown who called to the ministry during the Great Awakening. In 1770, he abandoned his family and encouraged his followers to build the Square House in Harvard. His perfectionist ideals and practices of spiritual wifery attracted numerous followers with millennial expectations. Many of them followed his lead and abandoned their own families to live communally in the house. They were expected to practice celibacy until they themselves really reached a perfected state, total sinlessness, at which point they would be mated with a divinely chosen partner. Children born of these unions were also sinless. Irelandites believed their leader would never experience physical death until he died in September of 1778 as a result of a serious 2-year illness. Irelandites remained in the square house living communally until Anne Lee arrived in 1781. Her ideas attracted numerous Irelandites to her cause, and the square house became a base of operations of sorts. Meacham and other missionaries were sent out from there, and believers from New Lebanon, Hancock, and other formative Shaker communities moved their families and belongings to Harvard to live. Frightened by the sudden influx of Mother Anne's disciples, locals in Harvard raised a mob. Mother Anne and her cohort fled, but the Shakers were able to maintain a presence in the area and formally gather a decade later. By the first decades of the 19th century, Shaker society was living up to Meacham's vision. Daily life was dictated by the toll of the bell. Shaker design was codified and replicated across the diaspora, from the landscape and architecture of the village to the furniture, clothing, and domestic objects used therein. Worship services or meetings consisted of scripted dance and song, and the Shakers labored hard in worship as well as work. And the Shaker industries, the seeds, the agricultural products, the medicines, the furniture, woodenware, and other products were immensely productive and supported a thriving economy. In 1821, the Shaker precepts were printed in a volume called the Millennial Laws, and by and large, the Shakers were obedient and life was good, if not entirely sinless. Food, clothing, and shelter were all in abundance, and for many decades, the villages were havens for pilgrims seeking a new way of life. Even so, the early 19th century population began to decline, and admittedly, recruitment for the Shakers was challenging. Joining meant giving up all property, family, and sex, and many of the young Shakers brought into the community's children began to defect. They would apostate to employ their superlative Shaker educations and skills in the service of the capitalist marketplace and burgeoning industrial sector. To reinvigorate and hopefully retain the younger generation, the Shakers looked inward, seeking inspiration from their own history. They published the testimonies of the life, character, revelations, and doctrines of our ever blessed Mother Anne Lee and the elders with her. And there's more to that title, as you see there. A text that gathered and recorded the recollections of older believers, those who quote eye and ear witnesses who had known Mother Anne and the first elders and could provide detailed account of their lives and accomplishments. The testimonies begins with the birth and spiritual blossoming of Mother Anne and continues through her missionary travels through New England. It provides examples of manifestations of God and Mother, instructions in spiritual and temporal affairs, and precepts under which these groups were eventually drawn into communities of believers. The intent of the testimonies is to disseminate an intimate knowledge of Anne Lee and her cohort of founders, that all believers, novice and experienced, may feel a deeper connection to the church. Did this revisitation of the life, work, and power of Mother Anne spark a renewed interest in charismatic communications with the spirit world that ultimately led to the activities of the era of manifestations? And was the appeal of Mother Anne in the spirit world compounded by an underlying resistance to the relative stasis of Shaker life at this time? And what else was at play that led up to this grand spiritual movement? Scholar Robert Orsi describes religion as a network of relationships between heaven and earth. In the early 19th century, the Second Great Awakening was underway in the Eastern US, which, like its first iteration, ushered in a sense of renewed spiritual fervor, a Protestant revival. An aspect of the Second Great Awakening was a shifting relationship with death, perhaps a post-war phenomenon as well, that reconfigured early American cultural values on the existence of invisible forces and the possibilities to engage unseen worlds. To the Shakers, the boundary between the physical and the spiritual worlds had always been blurred. Mother Anne claimed she could communicate with angels and the souls of the deceased, a tradition passed along to her believers. As the generation that had known Mother Anne personally passed away, the spirit world once again became a central focus of Shaker life. Gift drawings are among the only Shaker material artifacts that make the connection between the material and the spiritual explicit. Menageries of mystical flora and fauna, otherworldly symbols, and geometric blueprints resembling works of constructivist art are just some of the motifs found on the approximately 200 gift drawings held in public and private collections. Like everything designed and made by the Shakers, These bewildering works of art represent correspondence between life and what exists beyond. They were messages collapsing the boundary between the corporal world and the celestial sphere. The windows of heaven were indeed thrown open, and gift drawings were portals to see beyond the visible. Hannah Cahoon, perhaps the most famous gift drawing artist, created this piece, The Tree of Life, at age 66. Her small group of visionary artworks are perhaps the best known of the Shaker gift drawings. All use trees and fruit as a motif, important symbols within many religious traditions for their connection to the Garden of Eden and the source of eternal life. Father Joseph drew on the tree as an illusion for Shaker unity. He famously said, "If it is so in the root, it must be so in the branches. And as the order is complete in the foundation, it must be so in the building." For Meacham, the tree was symbolic of the strength of his Shaker diaspora rooted in Mother Ann's legacy. Unlike automatic writings created in the throes of possessions, Shaker gift drawings are transcriptions of visions recorded in the days after spirit encounters. The artist of the visualization is not necessarily the instrument who received the message, rather they are more of a spiritual scribe, which is why many gift drawings are unattributed and instead labeled with the name of the spirit, the recipient of the gift, and the date the communication occurred. Broadly, very broadly, gift drawings can be drawn into three categories: pictorial works, leaf and heart cutouts, and the sacred sheets. The pictorial works are illustrations of heavenly landscapes that embody the broader ideology of Shaker craft. They are meticulously designed with marks indicating that tools were used to lay out the compositions, rendered in a spectrum of jewel-toned hues, and every detail appears purposeful. This piece is in the collection of Fruitlands. It's by Sister Sarah Bates. Sister Sarah came to the Shakers of Waterville when she was 11 and later moved to New Lebanon, New York. Her father, Ishker Bates, was a spiritual leader in the Shaker Church, and he was one of the missionaries sent out to gather new orders in Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky. 9 of Sarah's sacred rolls are attributed to her. Detailed emblems illustrated here include a clock, trumpet, 5 sacred trees belonging to Mother Ann, Father William, Father James, Father Joseph, and Mother Lucy. There's also fine script, and she was a school teacher, so it's very exact. In 1918, this piece was actually given to the founder of Fruitlands, Clara Endicott Sears, by Eldris Catherine Allen of the Mount Lebanon Shaker community. In a letter to Clara, Eldris Catherine wrote, quote, "Now I will just whisper something to you, which I would like to have you hold apart from the misunderstanding public. Among the literature of the manifestations period of our people, 1837 to 47, are some charts made by the sisters of visions received and communications given by spirit messengers. As you prove capable of understanding much of the spirit and meaning of that time and hold a thought so reverent, I feel that it would not be out of place for me to place one of these under your personal care to exhibit to those only whom, in your judgment, are capable of feeling as well and seeing with outward vision." Clara Endicott Sears actually installed this in a period room in Fruitlands when it first opened. There's fantastic photos of that. Many of the symbols found in Shaker gift drawings have real world reference. Icons from gravestones, Masonic symbology, celestial bodies, and quilting and embroidery motifs, among other things. Some works mash up these abstract symbols with physical materials from the Shaker world. In this piece by New Lebanon Shaker, Sister Miranda Barber, you have 4 angels in each corner blowing the 4 horns of Revelations, and Mother Ann in her little golden chariot in the lower right of the page. In the middle of the mansion, pictured in the center, you have chairs, tables, and a very Shaker latch on the doorway there. That's presumably the gateway to heaven. The inscription reads, "So come sit down in the mansion of the blessed." In the center there, the yellow seeing all God's eye cross motif is wisdom's holy seal. The second group of gift drawings illustrated here are the leaf and heart cutouts and rewards of merit, which contain very little illustration. Instead, these diminutive, intimate drawings are enveloped in fine script. Eldris Polly Jane Reed created many of the existing cutouts for her peers in New Lebanon. Addressed to specific brethren and sisters, the message are divine expressions of affection and esteem. And then finally, the last group, the body of gift drawings known as the Sacred Sheets, which was the inspiration for Maria and Allison's performance and video. These pieces appear lively and strange, comprised of a chaotic jumble of curlicues, flourishes, and hash marks that bloom across the page. These artworks represent a spiritual lexicon occupying a liminal space between text and image. They evoke maps, fecund gardens, and musical notation broken free of its 5-line staff. Intentionally cryptic, the power of the sacred sheets comes from their mystery. They are wild and unknowable, and they can only be explained as the words of angels transcribed by human hands. Admittedly, there's not much that's known about the sacred sheets, purposefully so. Their history is not documented, if in any documentation existent anyway, so far, and their meaning can only be intuited from their form and the context of the material records left behind, other gift drawings and manuscripts. Curiously, there is a manuscript in the collection of Shaker Museum at Lebanon, dated March 5th, 1843, a Sunday, the very day that this sacred sheet was received by its instrument. The inspiration, the title, The Holy Word of the Lord God Almighty, given at Wisdom's Valley, and written by the inspiration at the Holy Mount, indicates that the text itself and the instructions therein were initially received and written in Waterville, New York, and then transcribed again in New Lebanon, New York. During the era of manifestations, each Shaker community was given its spiritual name. So Waterville was Wisdom's Valley, New Lebanon was Holy Mount, Hancock was the City of Peace, Harvard was Lovely Vineyard, on and on. A PDF of the Holy World is available on Mount Lebanon's online database, which is fantastic. And admittedly, I haven't read it line by line because I'm not great at reading 19th century script. It's very exhausting. But I was able to decipher that on page 30 of the text is a reference to a quote, new manner written which no man knoweth, which may allude to the divination and later production of the mysterious writing of the sacred sheets. There's additional documentation of unknowable text in another manuscript in the collection of the New York Public Library, dated just a few days prior to this, on March 1st, 1843. In this manuscript, New Lebanon's community scribe observed, about this time and a few weeks apart, there has been a remarkable manifestation from the spirits in writing certain mysterious texts containing many hieroglyphics, an abundance of mysterious writing and unknown characters. They are said to contain much that will be revealed. The enigmatic nature of the sacred sheet seems to capture the scribe's imagination here. And it's implied that the artworks had abundant meaning only knowable to the spirits and the instrument, meaning that would be revealed in the future, meaning that could not be challenged. To the Shakers, the sheet seemingly had prophetic power, a power that could be employed, modified, and reimagined as needed. At this point in the era of manifestations, it had been unfolding for more than 5 years, and as the spirit work progressed, a tension between gifts of inspiration and the need for order and uniformity, as introduced by Meacham, was increasingly at odds. Through 1841, the visionists seemed to prevail, and a cohort of predominantly young women held an unprecedented position within the strata of, within the strata of Shaker spiritual power. They upended previous hierarchies. The new converts eclipsed the elders. Sporadic bodily contortions derailed established choreography. Some visionists employed their newfound spiritual authority to test the structures of Shaker society, using their gifts to reveal illicit improprieties, make false accusations, and settle old scores, and generally just manipulate their fellow believers. Hancock elder Barnabas Sprague admitted that, quote, the elders have a hard time of it in this hurricane of gifts to know what is revelation and what is not. Eventually, Shaker leadership reined the visionists in. The minister's approach to controlling the spiritual phenomena was twofold. Firstly, they used Holy Mother Wisdom, the female aspect of the dual Godhead, who made her first appearance in 1841. The ministry in New Lebanon planned Holy Mother Wisdom's visits well in advance and informed each Shaker community by letter of her impending arrival, giving precise dates and instructions. For example, she visited Harvard on July 25th of 1841, and during her visit, her first act was to appoint instruments. She appointed 7 sisters and 7 brothers to speak for her and, quote, bear witness to her presence. In essence, the ministry began appointing instruments within each Shaker community, individuals selected from the church family who were able to stay on message, communicating revelations in obedience to and in union with the visible lead. Once designated, the instruments would will themselves to revelation by whirling, bowing, and writhing with their eyes closed to direct the mind with excessive energy to the attainment of gifts. By 1843, it can be assumed that most spirit manifesting, was conducted by sanctioned instruments and vetted by the ministry. So the messaging serves to support and develop the Shaker theology rather than potentially destabilize it. Also for much of that year, 1843, in the collection of Philadelphia Art Museum is a map, a really compelling piece, The Holy City, attributed to Polly Jane Reed. An accompanying manuscript describes how the spirit Adam visited New Lebanon to provide the Shakers with a plan of heaven. Meticulously laid out and numbered, the geometry of the Holy City reinforces the established Shaker aesthetic, comprised of balanced squares, rectangles, circles, and a spectrum of traditional Shaker hues. Representing buildings, gardens, golden streets, walls, and waterways, the river of life, this intriguing civic plan can be read as a send up from the ministry, a deliberate merging of ideology, Shaker aesthetics, and cosmic geography to reassert the truth of the Shaker endeavor. The rigid geometry was echoed conceptually and literally in the ministry's second mechanism to curb their manifestations. The introduction of new rituals that lent structure to the spirit manifestations, compartmentalizing ecstatic expressions within scheduled times, spaces, and forms. The infamous mountain meetings, held each May and September from 1842 to 1854, were rituals devised to be an exercise in unity. All believers were encouraged to participate as instruments and commune with the spirits in turn. Each Shaker community was instructed to clear a space adjacent to the village to use as a feast ground or holy hill. The site itself was chosen by an instrument under the direction of the spirits, and once cleared, the Shakers fenced the area and constructed two small shelters, one for brethren and one for sisters, to protect them from the rain. In the center, what you see here, they erected a fountain stone, a marble slab inscribed with ritual text. Shaker apostate David Lamson described, quote, "It is a fountain, not of literal waters, but of the water of life, and it is exceedingly productive of spiritual gifts. It serves also as a center around which they march, dance, sing, and play." Preparation for the mountain meetings included fasting, confession of sins, prayer, and being dressed, quote unquote, in spiritual garments by two angels. On the day of the celebration, the Shakers ascended the feast ground in procession, singing, bowing, and shouting. Arriving at the site, the rituals began with a blessing of instruments, followed by collective dancing, whirling, shaking, and ecstatic movements. Following the dance, the instruments pantomime figurative activities, the anointing with oil, washing feet, sowing and watering of spiritual seeds, bestowing of gifts, and sharing a bowl of, quote, love and union, and consuming a sumptuous feast while drinking spiritual wine, which incidentally caused spiritual inebriation. A gift drawing by Sister Hannah Cahoon entitled "A Bower of Mulberry Trees" depicts a long Shaker trestle table on which a spiritual feast has been displayed. Illustrating a mountain meeting in the waning years of the era of manifestations, Cahoon's composition evokes the idea of a passage between worlds. Indeed, the bower functions as a gateway, a visual meeting of heaven and earth where the living and the spirits may come together to feast. Cahoon emphasizes this by offering two simultaneous perspectives on the scene, a forward-facing mortal view and an aerial God's eye view. Her inscription reads, "I saw it distinctly, the long white table standing under the bower with cake and knives upon it." The capacity to imagine the world otherwise, whether building a village from the ground up or pulling back the sky to reveal the unseen, demonstrates the transformative power of the human imagination. The Shakers used imagination as a tool, inspiring creativity and innovation, cultivating unity and a sense of shared purpose, and a listening intimacy with God. According to Canterbury Shaker elder Henry Clay Blinn, the vision of simple message has become the blessing of thousands and has placed the heavens above them as a beautiful star of hope. The era of manifestations emerged from the tension between order and volatility, consistency and reinvention. Shaker gift drawings continue to be compelling for their embodiment of this duality. They exert institutional order through establishing contact with more supernatural and unwieldy sources of faith. Much like Meacham's vision for the material landscape of Shaker Zion, gift drawings provided a window into the celestial realm, thereby mediating a passage between heaven and earth. In a sense, the visionary artworks are blueprints, tools for the Shaker world to more closely resemble its heavenly archetype. In the mid-1840s, the ministry realized the power of the Arab manifestations was waning, so it sought to strengthen its position by reissuing the Millennial Laws in 1845. Strict even for Shaker standards, the 1845 edition can be seen, as Brother Ted Johnson of Sabbath Day Lake wrote, quote, perhaps the final attempt of those most clearly associated with the spirit manifestations to turn the rule of disinterest and distrust, which was making itself so evident. Like most rearguard actions, it seems to have proved to have been a highly unsuccessful attempt at redeeming a lost cause. In 1846, Sister Mary Wicks, an instrument and one of the accredited artists of the Sacred Sheets, apostatized, leaving the New Lebanon community with her future husband, Brother D.M. Bennett, an herbalist and community scribe who went on to become one of the most prominent free thinkers in the late 19th century. Together, Bennett and Wicks established a publication, The Truth Seeker, dedicated to science, morals, free thought, free discussions, liberalism, sexual equality, labor reform, progression, free education, and whatever tends to elevate and emancipate the human race. The Bennett sought to promote reason over superstition, humanity over false theologies, provoking readers to divest themselves from the concept of a vengeful God and the God-anointed rulers of mankind. In his memoir, D.M. Bennett wrote that he, quote, regards the worship and adoration that has been bestowed upon an imaginary unknown being somewhere above the stars as labor entirely thrown away. Such a being can neither be benefited nor injured by anything we can possibly do. Like the sun, he is entirely beyond our reach of influence. If all the emotional fervor and worship that has been bestowed upon this unknown deity could have been directed towards humanity, to beings who really have an existence and are susceptible of being benefited by the services of others, their world would have been vastly better off. Given their history with the Shakers, it's impossible to separate the Bennett's desire to seek other kinds of truth from their dogmatic upbringing and, moreover, active participation in the Arab manifestations and its effects. In 1847, when the Fox sisters in Rochester first started experiencing their spirit rappings, the Shakers were intrigued, and many thought this might lead to a new influx of believers. They followed mainstream spiritualism, even inviting spiritualists and mediums to give talk at Shaker villages. But at that point, the Arab manifestations was largely over, even though gift drawings continued to be produced into the mid-1850s. Gifts of Spirit inspired the Shaker collective imaginary, reinvigorating the faith through expressions of the extraordinary. Authentic or not, Shaker visions reaffirm Mother Anne's place at the center of the spirit world, and as a tangible presence within the community, there was more space to reflect on the contributions of Mother Anne and Mother Lucy within the society's traditions. By the mid-19th century, the specters of the Arab manifestations had faded, and the Holy Mount had returned to wildness. Even so, the legacy of Mother Anne's work lives on. Through creativity of contemporary artists, we can again put on spiritual spectacles, release our imaginations, and feast with the angels. And that is where I will end. There are just a selection of resources here that I used for this and that I would recommend for you. And feel welcome to reach out if you have any additional questions or want to talk about this further, because I always do. And I will turn it back to Catherine. And it looks like the timing was good. So
yes, thank you so much, Sarah.
Of course.
And sorry, I'm just taking a look at, it looks like we have, we're gonna segue into Q&A here to our audience. So if you do have any questions, feel free to put those into the Q&A box or even right here into the chat. We do have one question that we have had come up here, which is, do you have any links to reading more about the Truth Seeker and Bennett?
Yes. Hi, Rich. Yes, I do, and I can email them to you. The Truth Seeker actually has an extensive archive that's all digitized and online, which is fantastic. There's a really great, well, I can't say that's great. I haven't actually read all of it. So, but there is a biography of D.M. Bennett that was published a couple years ago. I can't recall the author's name, but I actually believe he's involved with the online archive of the Truth Seeker. And so Rich, you can either like Google it, or I'm happy to send you those resources by email. It's a really, really interesting history. And that's one aspect of this that I'd love to dig into more is one, Mary Wicks's involvement in the Truth Seeker. There's also the book, My Name is Wicks, or Our Name is Wicks, that studies the Wicks genealogy, but doesn't provide much information. So to get a sense of her involvement in the publication, and also just to learn more in general about that history and the legacy of Shaker within it.
Awesome. Sarah, we've also had a request to perhaps put that last slide up one more
Oh,
time
yeah,
with
sure.
the resources.
Yes. And I can type it and you can send it out following if you would like. But yes, this is it. And in fact, one of our authors is here in this program. Sharon Kumler is the author of The Shaker's Private Art. She has literally written the book on Shaker gift drawing. So Sharon, thank you for being here. And I hope I made you a little bit proud.
Awesome. And Sharon has just shared into the chat that the author of the biography is Roderick Bradford.
Thank you. Yes.
Closing the loop on that. Question from Maria is, could you possibly speak to the drawings on envelopes? Do you categorize them with the celestial valentines?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not familiar with that body of work too intimately. So I apologize. I'm not sure. I'd have to take a closer look. But if Sharon is here and she has an answer, just type it in. I would love her backup on this one.
We also have had a request for wondering if there will be access to a transcript of your lecture. I'm not sure if that was something you were.
Yeah, sorry, I speak fast. I'd be happy to share it with anyone who wants it. You can just email me.
Okay.
Who is that?
That was from, sorry, I lost
Oh,
it.
that's Bob. Yes, Bob, I will send you a transcript if you're curious. I'd be happy to.
Great. And Maria also followed up at, I think I read about them in Spiritual Spectacles, but perhaps misremembering.
Oh, that book is so dense. I will take another look. I do know that Valentines, the first commercially available Valentines were broadly available as early as the 1840s, which was very, very interesting to me. And sort of, I mean, it was a very common thing to show tokens of affection in this way during this time period, and so common that it became a commercially available thing very shortly thereafter. So if that helps lend a little bit of context, I just happened to look that up yesterday because it was Valentine's Day and I was looking at these Valentines.
How timely.
Yeah.
We have another question here from Caitlin. What are the theories about why most gift drawings were by women?
Also really interesting, Caitlin. I mean, that's a can of worms that I also sort of like feeds into a much larger broadly cultural story about women, their marginalization, and their ability to express themselves and sort of make space for themselves through the production of visual art. And I mean, the structures and the power and authority within the Shaker Society, while equal, purported equal, I mean, it's complicated. And so women took a very prominent role, not only within the era of manifestations, but within the spiritualist movement more broadly, as a way, in part, to ally themselves with social issues that were playing out at the time. I mean, the spiritualist movement was backed by individuals, notably women, who were advocating for temperance, for women's rights, for the abolition of slavery, and all these other sort of social movements, so that in the process of sort of joining the spiritualists, not only could you attain sort of a higher moral, ethical plane in a spiritual sense, but also in an earthly sense as well. And so that's a really great question that has a very, very big answer. Two, it's interesting to note that some of the most powerful visionists at the time were actually men. And so I think too, the role of men within this history is often overlooked because they actually are some of the larger voices within the entire era.
Great. Our next question is, apologies if I mispronounce this, from Killeen.
Eileen.
Did the Shakers ever produce gift, in quotes, drawings and material other than paper? Any 3D manifestations?
Oh, that's so interesting. I think, Killeen, that is a great question. I mean, the thing is that the media wasn't necessarily the message, if that makes sense. And so though they were on paper, like much of the history of sort of folk and visionary art, they weren't created with the intention of creating artwork. And so I think the materiality of them is not necessarily the meaning of them. So I think the intent could be translated into movement, into song. I think all of these various sort of products of the era of manifestations dovetail into each other. And for the Shakers may have had different boundaries than we can find them to today based on their media, if that helps answer that question. But that's a really great, really interesting thing to think about. And that's sort of actually an abstract answer. And so again, if Sharon has any more literal answer for that, that would be very helpful as well.
Great. Okay, one more from Maria again. Do you have any info or theories about when these drawings were made?
Oh, that is also a great question. I mean, given that the drawings were manifested following the spiritual encounter and generally translated, the artist and the visionist would not have been necessarily the same individual. I imagine that there was sanctioned time and space for these activities to play out, particularly sort of in this later era of the era of manifestations, 1841 beyond. I mean, judging from the sacred sheets, both being divined on March 5th, which was a Sunday, I imagine that it was, a specific service experience, setting the scene, set and setting for the visionary experiences, to bring in some LSD terminology. And so, but I don't have a great answer for that as well. That's a really great question that I will look into for you.
Yeah, pushing that a little further, and this is certainly what you were getting to with the sanctioned time kind of note. But Maria continued, like in a Shaker's busy day, how did they find the space?
That is a great question. So I imagine that,
fair point.
Yeah, they were working all the time, but I don't know. I mean, could it be when the vision struck, they could take a time out? I don't know. I don't have a great answer for that. I think the circumstances were different. They evolved, but and we have this very limited material record documentation left behind. But yeah, that's a great question. I would like to think more about that and sort of imagining how these phenomena actually played out in everyday life is a compelling thing to consider.
Anne asks, what about all the songs that were composed through inspirational visions?
There were, I mean, oh gosh, I'm forgetting the exact number, but I mean, hundreds and thousands. Yeah. I mean, I believe Shaker canon overall. Oh my gosh, sorry guys, I'm not great with numbers. But the point being is that, I mean, songs were created in profusion. And so, and again, sort of this idea of all of these creative works going hand in hand. There was a slide where I showed Shaker musical notation side by side, I believe, with the map of the city plan. And those two documents, I didn't mention this, but those were also two items created in the same day in the same community, New Lebanon. So again, that would indicate that this was sort of a sanctioned time for visioning. And two, the fact that these operated in tandem, these two sort of products, these manifestations operated in tandem. But yeah, it was the most productive period for Shaker song as well. And so Daniel Patterson, one of the resources I recommended, has written the book on that, The Shaker Spiritual. And so if you're interested in more of the auditory history, I would recommend taking a read in that to start. But that is its whole other thing. It's a great question.
Great. And a comment that came in earlier that is a nice segue to what I will stick in the chat here is Maria pointed out that much of what you talked about this evening is included in your essay in the exhibition catalog. So I'm just putting in the chat for everybody. If you would like to get a copy of the catalog, they are available for purchase in our online store, and that can be shipped anywhere. Can also be picked up in person at Fruitlands if you are local, which I will add, if you are local or relatively local and would like to take a trip to come see the exhibition, we would love to have you. We are open weekends through the winter, and the show is up through March 13th. So just a few more weeks to check it out. And as mentioned earlier in the program as well, Maria Molteni and Allison Halter will be joining us for another virtual program screening their film Sacred Sheets with a talk also marking the book launch of this catalog. And that will be on March 1st. The link for that event is in the chat as well. I don't see any other questions coming in just this second. So unless anyone wants to quickly type something into the chat box, I think we will go ahead and bring this evening's program to a conclusion. I want to offer such a huge thank you to Sarah for joining us this evening with this wonderful presentation. And this was recorded, so if you want to look back at it later on or missed anything or want to share it with somebody else you think will be interested, we'll be going onto our YouTube channel. That's the Trustees YouTube channel sometime in the next week or so for broader sharing. We'd love to share out with others as well. So thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you everybody for joining us this evening.
Thank you.